Good morning, everyone. It's good to be here with you again. I think we can really discover interesting things when we think about the things that were passed down to us from generation to generation. And most of the time, they are things that we do not really think about. It's just part of who we are and what we do. Think for a moment about your life and the things you do or the things that are part of your life that was passed down to you from your ancestors. Is there anyone who wants to share something that you can think of? Yes, dancing. Yeah, Audrey? Ears.
Well, I still collect bits of string. My mother always collected bits of string. I can't throw string out.
Margaret collects pieces of string because her mother collected pieces of string. That's interesting. Music, yes, definitely. And maybe you too, but I will sing to my daughter the songs my mother would sing to me when I was little. I think it's something that will be handed down. My daughter will sing it to her children, music. And I think some of these things are invisible things, like values and cultural beliefs. Religion is passed on. And I think language. Do you think language is a thing that we pass on? I think so. If I listen to how people talk here and how we used to talk in South Africa, the English is totally different. I came here and I talked about cookies. And I discovered here you call it biscuits. And like, I used to talk about my pants, and people would give me a funny face, and I realized that here pants is underwear and not a trouser. And I would talk about Cokie pens, and nobody would understand, and then I will realize, oh, you say marker or felt pen. And that is what we can say about language. There are so many things. What about sport? I will prefer to watch rugby because my father watched rugby. Parenting styles and the food we eat, how we celebrate special days. And sometimes we think that the way I do things is the way everybody does them. Like for 36 years of my life, I thought everybody will have a braai for New Year's. You will call it a barbecue. And so I came to Scotland and I realized, no, other people have steak pie for New Year's. And I really never thought about it before. And also, when we think about Christmas, many things are passed down to us. A Christmas tree, for example. Why do we have that? Do we even know? But we have it. And what about the wreath on our front doors? It's things that our ancestors did, and we do it now. And these things also go together with a lot of emotions and memories. We enter this season of Advent with lots of traditions, memories, and emotions. Now, when we go to the Bible and we think about our Bible memories of Christmas, I will remember my mother would read to me the story of Mary and Joseph on their way to Bethlehem, or the angels and the shepherds, or the wise men with their gifts. Did your mothers tell you about the genealogy of Matthew and Luke? No. So that is not one of our fond memories. And I think this genealogies that we find in Matthew and in Luke is puzzling for most of us. We tend to find it boring, it's difficult to pronounce the names, and we just skim over them. For most of us, it is names of obscure figures who add little to the nativity story, at least from a modern perspective. And I think we would usually begin reading Matthew chapter 1 from verse 18. For us today, this may be strange to start a narration with a family tree, but genealogies were not considered to be dull in their original context. It was a common feature of many ancient and religious texts. The Hebrew people secured political and priestly legitimacy through kinship, and they used genealogies to establish the lines for passing on possessions and property, along with role and rank and authority. Quite literally, the success or the failure of a tribe or a king rested on its claim to the right ancestry. So when we consider this, we realize that Matthew had a very good reason for starting his gospel that started with the birth narrative of Jesus this way. He started by making a statement, an account of the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. And this was a big and bold claim. It was directed towards a Jewish audience seeking both political liberation and spiritual empowerment during a time of oppression. So Matthew wanted to say that this Jesus, whose story I will tell, embodied both King David's royal authority and the covenantal authority of Abraham. When we do some research, we find that we have reason to believe that a lot of the early readers of the gospel already embraced Jesus as Messiah. But Matthew was still trying to convince a few people of this. Now, if you wanted the people from Israel to buy the idea that Jesus was the Messiah, Jesus from Nazareth, prerequisite number one was that he had to be from the line of David. And Matthew also tried to show that Jesus could be traced down to Abraham. And that was because of the promise in Genesis 12 to Abraham that all the nations of the earth will be blessed through him. And now the important message that Matthew wanted to convey with this piece of information is the fact that Jesus came to earth for all people, not only the Jewish people. He came for the entire world. So we realize that even though a genealogy isn't very interesting, and we may wonder, what can I learn from a bunch of strange names? It actually have a very important purpose. And then there's something that we will not find strange today, but it would have been very puzzling to the early readers, and that is the fact that Matthew included the names of 5 women in this family tree. It was a culture that traced lineage almost exclusively through men. So the names of these women would stand out like beacons in a stream of male names. We know that women were not considered at all to be significant or important in that time. The ordinary woman is largely unseen in the pages of the Bible. The majority of women in the Bible are unnamed. About, at most, 8% of the named characters in the Bible are women. We see the attitude towards women when we go to the Jewish prayer books. We see that every Jewish man had to recite 3 blessings daily. And they would pray, "Thank God that I am not a Gentile, thank God that I am not a woman, and thank God that I am not a slave." And when we think about it like this, it is really significant and noteworthy that Matthew made women part of the family tree of Jesus Christ. And then, if we take a closer look at who these women were, the matter becomes even more interesting. Because if Matthew wanted to include women, we would expect him to include Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah. They were the Jewish women. They were the Israelites. But it is not those women that Matthew chose to include in his family tree of Jesus Christ. In the language of those days, we will say that there were pagans among the women included by Matthew. They were a Hittite, a Canaanite, and a Moabite. And in a time following the Israelite return from exile, great emphasis was placed on the purity of the genealogies. All foreign people and their influence had to be rejected. The people had to be pure. And now here in Jesus' family tree, we see the names of pagan women as proud foremothers of Jesus Christ. And I think for a Jew of those days, it must have been almost unthinkable. Tamar is the first woman named. Her story is not a feel-good story. It exposes things that we rather do not even talk about. We find her story in Genesis 38. The second woman named was Rahab. She was a Canaanite woman living in Jericho. She didn't have an honorable past. We can read her story in Joshua 2. She became famous after hiding Israelite spies, and she secured the safety of her family after supplying the Israelite spies with enough information to achieve victory in Jericho. The third woman named is Ruth. She was the widow who had to take initiative to secure a future for her and her mother-in-law. Her story is well known, and we can find it in the book of Ruth. Then we hear about the woman of Uriah. She's not called by her name here, but it was Bathsheba. Her story, which involved King David, tells of adultery, bloodshed, prophetic rebuke, and tragic consequences. We can find it in 2 Samuel 11. And then we find the name of Mary, the mother of Jesus, and we all know her story. We can zoom into the stories of each of the men in this family tree, but I'm afraid we will be here the whole day because we will talk about 42 people. I think we get the message clear enough just by briefly highlighting the 5 women. When we read this long list of strange names, we remember that each story, each name holds a story. And when we go into the history of these people, we are reminded of stories of triumph, of trauma, hardship, and beauty. All that was part of the lives of these people. And when we zoom into their lives, we may not be able to see how each character propels the story forward. But when we zoom out, we can see how each story is woven together into a larger tapestry. And then we realize that these people were real people. People who sometimes had complex and messy lives, can't be reduced to stereotypes. And when we investigate who these people were, it reminds us that God works through the prominent and the glamorous people, but also through the people on the margins, the unexpected people. And when we reflect on this family tree, the message of Christmas breaks through in a very significant way. The people in this family tree ground the Christmas story in an authentic earthiness. Through their stories, we are reminded that Jesus really became a human of flesh and blood. He was born into a human family. He lived an earthly life. He was subjected to humanity in its fullness. And it also reminds us that Christmas is essentially a memorial of God's love and God's grace without limits. It proclaims the gospel message that all are welcome with God. The gospel message is good news for all people, also those trying to survive in the margins of society, also the broken, the traumatized, the imperfect. And when you think about the people in this family tree, it counteracts the tendency to idealize the ancestors of Jesus as shiny, perfect heroes. Instead, they draw the attention and the focus back to the Messiah, where it belongs. Because some of the stories attached to the people in this family tree are kind of like skeletons in the closet of Jesus' family tree. But Matthew reminds us, it is because of stories like this that Jesus came. Jesus came to deal with the reality of humanity, with the reality of sin, with the reality of the brokenness of this world. These stories are not neat and clean, but it is included in the scriptures because life is often messy and full of brokenness. And when we think about that, it can give us hope, because our lives can also be messy, things can be broken. We are not squeaky clean either. But Jesus came into the world to save all kinds of people. And in Galatians chapter 3, we read that the Apostle Paul wrote, "Because of the coming of Jesus, there is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is no male and no female, for all are one in Christ Jesus." This is the message of hope, the message of God's grace for all people. With the holidays and with the Christmas season ahead, many of us will be with our families. Quite possibly in our conversations, we might talk about our family tree or our ancestors. When we do that, may we then remember this family tree. May we remember the important message it conveys. And may we go and live with hope with that message. Amen.